Okay.
All right. Just a little talking about real estate investing today, and what it's like, and what the opportunities are, and how real estate markets maybe are changing. Of course, I know the Washington, D.C. market best, but I know quite a bit about other markets. In general, because we're really developing the data capacity and research capacity to do this more, we're able to focus more and more on sort of micro neighborhoods and smaller area markets better than we have been able to do in the past. And so, if you're going to invest, you need to kind of learn how to use that type of research and to focus in relatively specific areas, ideally, because just in Washington, for example, it matters a great deal exactly where you are, even in the District of Columbia, which is a relatively small place of only 60-odd square miles. In terms of, so the markets that I know best are Washington, where I live, New York, where I grew up, Boston, where I lived, Chicago, where I lived, Atlanta, where my family is, to some extent Texas and California, where I used to travel a lot. But in general, the population of the United States, unlike most other industrial countries, because of immigration more than natural increase, is continuing to grow. So that's good news for the real estate industry in the United States. One of the great things about being in the real estate industry is that just the natural increase of population creates demand.
Yeah, people need a house. People need something.
So it's a
necessity.
There's always demand just being created as long as there are more people.
Right.
And there are going to be more people in the United States. So that's that's good news for us. Excuse me. There's increasing after the recession. Of course, the fears in the recession were real and remain real. Our economic situation is different than it was before the recession. We should probably just use our resources more effectively, kind of without regard to recessions. And this tends to suggest that areas like the Midwest and Ohio and Detroit and Pittsburgh, what we call Rust Belt cities that appear to have been important in the 2016 election. But for a long time in American politics, Ohio has been a swing state.
Right.
So it's not just a recent phenomenon.
Yeah, we had Trump and Hillary there every other day. So
yeah. If you look at Detroit, I mean, a lot of people are interested in Detroit. A lot of people are trying to invest in Detroit. It obviously has severe issues, but it also has a lot of people interested in it. And in a sense, a resource the United States has that's probably underutilizing are these older cities with developed housing and developed infrastructure that now have become kind of hollowed out by some policies of the past that promoted suburbanization, like FHA loans and things like that, interstate highway system in the 50s. And now with the desire of people to live in cities, has become somewhat more common than it was for perhaps 50 years. These older cities, I think, have some real advantages. And they certainly have, in the wake of the Great Recession, they have cost advantages. And they have locational advantages. Places like Youngstown, and actually places that have done better than that, like Indianapolis and Columbus illustrate this maybe better. They have great locational advantages because they're kind of between the East and the Midwest.
Right.
And they're kind of between the North and the South. And so any business involving logistics and transportation, Columbus and Indianapolis are great. And then by extension, some of the older cities near those areas have potential, have kind of a transportation and location potential that we're probably underutilizing. And then with the, and this is a point beyond the Rust Belt, but particularly applicable there. The United States developed all this infrastructure for suburbanization in a way that is in some ways inefficient, but in other ways we have this infrastructure that's there that was originally created for a relatively undense population situation that with some changes could probably support a much denser population. And so we have at least the sort of the right of way of a lot of the infrastructure already there. We may not be utilizing it up to its potential to begin with, so we have the ability to add more density just with that, and then ultimately we'll probably have to increase the scale of the infrastructure. But if we already have the right of way and things for infrastructure, that's going to be easier than it would be if we didn't have that. So we have this kind of latent resource of the cities themselves that older northern cities particularly that have become hollowed out, but are still largely there. And then we have this suburban resource of infrastructure that is there that may be being underutilized and can probably be further densified.
Right.
So those two things I see as positives for redeveloping these areas. And then also a number of industries have become more footloose. In other words, that they don't have to be as tied to a geographic area as they once have been. And here's an example. This is not a Rust Belt example, but it could be actually, which is the New York financial services industry has lost some population. It may well gain it back in the upturn and exceed, which I personally expect it will happen. But at least in the meantime, a number of New York financial jobs, exactly what jobs these are, I'm not totally sure, have been exported to Nashville and Tampa, more Sunbelt, cheaper locations, although prices in Nashville are going up fast from everything I hear. So, but why can't Cleveland and Cincinnati capture that work? It seems like they could if they tried, or if they figured out what New York financial firms that want to export jobs from New York want and need. In some ways, they may have a better infrastructure for doing it than Tampa and Nashville, but they have to figure out how to market that and how to, kind of use economic development to kind of get that word out to New York financial firms and figure out what types of jobs those actually are, and make themselves, or just market the strengths they already have in those areas to the companies that want to export those jobs from New York, for example. So that seems to have some promise. And then, of course, all kinds of computer and technology jobs don't necessarily have to be in a specific place. Now, I'm a person who also believes that random chance encounters with other people, such as ours on the plane, are important. And so the sheer concentration of people and random contacts in a place like New York is important. And so we will never get rid of that. We don't want to get rid of that. But the parts of that can be exported to cheaper places and maybe even done better in those places, if they're back office type functions or something that doesn't involve face-to-face contact so much, then we maybe should distribute those jobs around. We don't want New York. We want New York to be the financial center of the country, but we don't want New York to be exclusively dependent on financial services, because it creates some issues. And New York is turning more toward technology and some other things that is good, because what Silicon Valley has got is it has a balance between science and engineering and finance, because San Francisco is the West Coast financial center.
Right.
New York, of course, is the national financial center and international financial center, but really has not historically been so strong in science. If you look at the universities in New York City, and this is a very gross generalization, and I'm comparing it with just a few other places, at least proportionate to what New York is, what New York could be in science and engineering, it hasn't quite been there. The schools in New York City, are not as strong as somewhere else, as some other places. in science and engineering. And to their credit, the universities in New York, I think, are moving on this and are working on this. And an example from my own experience, although really from outside New York City, is the contest Mayor Bloomberg created to create a technology center in New York City on Roosevelt Island, and created an international competition for, which my legal alma mater, Cornell, won. And so Cornell is building this huge tech center on Roosevelt Island that, along with NYU's acquisition of a science and tech school, Polytechnic, and other moves, are, I think, going to ramp up to New York City's science and engineering, or at least in a happy world, will ramp up their science and engineering to a more Silicon Valley-like level, which I think would be a good thing all around.
Right.
I think Silicon Valley can stand the competition, frankly, and might even make them perform better. What the exact effect of that on smaller cities, I'm not completely sure of. But it would generally improve the national economy, so probably would improve their lot as well. And we tend to think of it, and certainly people in Midwestern cities tend to probably think of the post-World War II period in industrial employment as kind of a normal thing, or as a baseline that they're looking to. But in many ways, maybe it was an abnormal period, because the percentage of Americans, and I don't know enough to break it out by specific states or anything like that, but the percentage of Americans who belonged to a union peaked in around 1953 or something like that. And at that time, somewhere I think like 30% of the people in the United States actually belonged to unions, and that's been declining pretty steadily ever since, I think. I haven't looked at that recently. And so that sort of large, very broad union membership, high wage union type job tradition that built a great America in some ways for several decades. It just isn't there in the same way. Now, it feels like a bad thing, I think, to a lot of people, but on the other hand, could be a good thing, because it's stimulated a lot of other people toward entrepreneurship. And so I guess that suggests that in those areas, the Midwestern Rust Belt areas, where we need to emphasize entrepreneurship and the teaching of entrepreneurship, which at least to some extent can be taught, although there's actually quite a bit of debate about how much entrepreneurship you can really teach.
Right.
So that's one thing, and I mean, just having a major university like Youngstown, where you have been in Youngstown.
Yeah, Youngstown State University, everything kind of surrounds that, kind of like Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, universities can be a form of economic development for older Rust Belt, and that's what, Pittsburgh has done this with great success. They systematically set out to do it under a mayor a few years ago, who I've met, and they focused on eds and meds, and with great success. And Pittsburgh is lucky in that it has a tradition of has some great institutions.
Carnegie Mellon, the Pitt, and then
Pitt.
I think Bayer has their headquarters there.
Yeah, I mean, Pitt is Carnegie Mellon is a great school, a very intensive research school, very quantitative, very kind of industrial. Produces a lot of very good business academics. Actually, their PhD program is highly respected in the business school world. But Pitt is a university that is probably underestimated. I've met some extremely talented people from there than other schools. So they had quite a bit to work with to begin with on the eds side. The one problem with, it's actually less of a problem with eds, because education, we bring in so many international students, so education is in effect an export of the United States.
Yeah.
Medicine maybe less so. And so in kind of urban economics, we have a distinction between primary and secondary. And so primary is economic activity that really only benefits your city directly, like having a dry cleaners or something like that. The people are not going to come from Florida to use the dry cleaner in Pittsburgh.
Right, just those people directly there.
And then the secondary or sort of tradable economy. You know, what does a city make that it can sell to other cities or trade with other cities for their goods? And so, even though I think the EDS-MED strategy can be very good, I wonder about it a little bit in terms of tradability. And in fact, one thing I think that Trump's election demonstrates, I think of knowing the real estate industry as I do, I think of the things that somebody like Trump must know about or have done, or his mindset. And of course, he has done things internationally, but he's largely done things domestically. And so the real estate industry in which Trump has worked, or at least the parts of it in which he has worked, are pretty national parts of industry. They're not very international. They're not all that internationally tradable in many respects. So he has dealt with the more domestic parts of the American economy, and so I think is at least in part looking at it from that perspective. And so it's an obvious thing. Probably someone else has pointed it out, but I think it's worth taking time to point it out.
Right. So you think with his election, with like real estate investors, would that sort of change a shift of people's mindset of where they kind of invest now, knowing that maybe industries are coming back and values of houses are maybe going up? Like, do you think, like with Youngstown, like the value of houses have stayed? I guess anything with like a Youngstown address has kind of stayed around, I don't know, 30,000 and below sort of thing for like the past several decades.
Oh, yeah.
And rents kind of gradually gone up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think with maybe with industries coming back, do you see like the values maybe changing possibly?
Yeah, well, I think if especially Midwestern Rust Belt type cities can adjust, to a new economy and not look back to the peak of the unionization movement in 1953. I think they will. The EDS-MED strategy, at least to get things going, may be good. But to the extent we can come up with other industries that put these cities more in the tradable economy, and they make things that can be sold to other U.S. cities or sold around the world.
Right,
that would be even better.
Because Youngstown and Pittsburgh were these steel mills,
yeah.
And they kind of closed in the 1970s, and everybody left. But Youngstown kind of stayed in the past, and Pittsburgh, evolved with this ED-MED strategy that you're talking about, and kind of moved away from steel, obviously.
Yeah.
And Youngstown's kind of left with these empty steel mills.
Yeah.
So I think with Trump getting elected, hopefully something can evolve in Youngstown, and that's kind of the hope there.
Well, I'm hopeful. Both Hillary Clinton, I know any thinking person understands that the United States should improve its infrastructure. Both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump said it. But as someone who builds things, Donald Trump has a certain credibility there, whatever his other problems, and then the two people that he's put in charge of infrastructure are highly noted developers who have surely, even though they don't run infrastructure companies, I don't think, have surely dealt with a lot of infrastructure in the course of doing all the development that they have done. So they maybe they have at least some understanding of the importance of infrastructure to communities and how to get it done and how to utilize what you have and how to extend when necessary.
So hopefully they can use their experiences and move that to Washington and then spread that across the country. Hopefully.
Yes, and in Trump's inaugural speech, he said we're going to build bridges, we're going to build airports, we're going to build. A lot of it still sounded fairly automotive, frankly, but this is a tremendous opportunity for the United States and also for some of the more traditional union type workers if we can figure out the appropriate infrastructure that we really need. Now there's something about this that I'm conscious of from some of the experience with government works in the 30s is the need for planning and design of infrastructure. Because you can't, even if Donald Trump took all of the spare money the United States may have, or came up with additional money, without fairly concrete plans for infrastructure, it's good, or if we don't have them now, hopefully we have them for some things, but it's going to take time to develop those plans, and it's going to take personnel who are experts in infrastructure planning and costing and all kinds of things like that to really do this. And so you're not going to be able to do that overnight.
Right, yeah, it's not going to happen overnight, just gradually.
Robert Moses in the 1930s, the great builder of New York City, luckily for him, in the 1920s, he had built up a highly talented core of designers and engineers to design the park system of the New York metropolitan area. And so when the Depression occurred, he had this whole cadre of planners and engineers that knew how to build stuff quickly, and was able to get a disproportionate amount of the New Deal funds for New York City, and was able to build things like the Triborough Bridge in New York City. So that's why I'm conscious of this issue of planning and engineering, because other cities at that time lost to New York and to Moses because they didn't have that kind of planning ready.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. Or it simply suggests that we need to prioritize planning and engineering in those areas.
What I guess in real estate, commercial or residential, what kind of mistakes have you seen that other people have done that kind of help frame you with maybe your investing or other people's investing that you've advised of to do in the future?
Okay. Well, one thing is this is more of a kind of. It's important to understand that the recession of the late 80s, early 90s, it was a different recession than the Great Recession. And the recession of the late 80s, early 90s was more of an overbuilding in real estate. It was more of an overbuilding type of recession. And in that recession, what happened was it seemed to be so profitable that all of these people that knew nothing about real estate got into real estate development. So one warning sign in real estate investment is when a whole bunch of people are getting into real estate investment and development that don't know anything about it, it's probably a good time to get out because
it's oversaturated.
Things are getting overbuilt, and the wrong things are getting built. Here's another warning sign that is from the Great Recession, which I experienced directly on Wall Street, which was money was very flush, obviously, before the recession because of several things. Because largely because of after 9/11, the Federal Reserve and Alan Greenspan, probably in most ways correctly, flooded the market with money. And then also the end of the dot-com boom, money flowed, there was the dot-com bust, and so the money that was going into the dot-com boom, much of it flowed into real estate instead, looking for yield. And so that produced a somewhat different situation in the Great Recession. It was less of an overbuilding recession and more of a overfinanced recession. And so the large banks that lend money to large real estate projects, the cost of money to them was the same for all the big banks, basically. And so when people want to take out a loan to build a large project, they usually apply to 10 banks and see what kind of deal they get. And so since the banks could not really compete on price, they could compete maybe a little bit on service and stuff, but there's only so much you can do there, perhaps. They began competing on how many of the protections for the bank in the loan documents, which are called the covenants, they could remove. So they could say to their client, look, we've removed this obligation in case something goes wrong, so you're better off borrowing from us. So that was like the only way they could compete was by removing protections for the bank. And this is called covenant light. So when you start hearing covenant light, this is also probably a good time to get out of the market.
Was I guess since you were working with some of the gas companies, so you maybe seen like some creative commercial acquisitions. Was there anything I don't know that was creative, because I'm a young guy, I don't have much money, so I kind of need to be creative with how I acquire things. Was there anything that you kind of came across that was creative that you kind of
a whole concept is creative that I have dealt with in a somewhat peripheral way. I've been sort of worked on deals with this, but not really brought one to completion. That however, it should be a tool. Two things that should be tools in the real estate professionals' a quiver, an arrow in the quiver of arrows. One less known, one more known that I guess maybe I'll talk about for a minute, which is there's something called, that's more of a governmental thing, that is called enhanced use leasing. And what enhanced use leasing basically is what I've described as barter leasing. And this generally has to happen with a government. Could be federal, could be state, could be local. Being in Washington, I'm somewhat more familiar with the federal version of this. And what it is basically is that the government has spare real estate. And in fact, more so perhaps than the private sector, the government often has large chunks of real estate that are particularly valuable for their size. And at the same time, the government's budget is very constrained, and it doesn't necessarily also want to go to the bond market to build new projects, say a VA hospital. But it does have a lot of extra land that it doesn't happen to be using at the moment. And so what enhanced use leasing is, say the government has a large piece of land at the intersection of two interstate highways that would be great for a regional shopping mall. And say that the government needs a VA hospital built somewhere else. So what it will do is the government will ground lease this chunk of land for the shopping mall to a developer for 100 years. And then instead of making a monthly lease payment to the government, the developer will instead build a VA hospital for the government. So as long as the government has extra land, the government can essentially get a VA hospital kind of for free. Yes, there is the value of the land. I'm not saying it's negligible, but if the government isn't really using it, it's not of that much value to the government. So enhanced use leasing is a clever tool. It's a little complicated, it's more than a little. It's relatively complicated to do, but it is doable. And so someone who gets good at doing that has a kind of advantage. And the other, the best tax break remaining for real estate perhaps is the Section 1031 exchange. And Section 1031 refers to the section of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. And this is actually another form of barter. These are sort of things that get you out of the normal transition taxing situation.
Yeah, the capital gains.
Yeah, capital gains type situation. These get you out of that. And so what Section 1031 is it basically says you can trade a piece of real estate for another piece of real estate without triggering a taxable event. And so this is an extremely widespread thing in the real estate industry. And one of the ways that the major famous developers like the Samsells of the world create their empires. You can just kind of keep trading real estate and having it enhance in value and kind of trade your way up the real estate chain, paying no taxes, as long, there's a definition of how similar the properties have to be, but it's a really quite broad definition. And so you can just keep trading pieces of real estate that become more valuable for more and more valuable pieces of real estate
Right.
forever without paying any taxes, essentially, or at least federal capital gains taxes.
Just keep
There's
cycling
all
it through
kinds
and keep moving
all
up.
kinds of taxes in the real estate industry. And so there is some thought in the current political climate of repealing Section 1031, but the outcry from the real estate, or maybe not the outcry, but the subtle lobbying of the real estate industry is not likely to favor that.
Awesome. Hey,
All right.
hey Chuck, it was a pleasure.
All right.
Happy to meet you on the plane there. And
All right. Well, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully.
hey, I know you're a busy guy. I don't want to take up all your time, but I appreciate it, sir.
All right. Well, you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right.